take this opportunity to introduce Meera officially. Dr. Meera Baindur currently is faculty at Manipal Center for Philosophy and Humanities. She has a doctoral degree in the interdisciplinary area of environmental philosophy. Her research interests include environmental humanities, ecological ethics, place studies, cultural geography, and Indian philosophical traditions. She is an avid game player on the internet and actively investigates the virtual world. She owes her www mapping knowledge to her brothers, both software programmers, and her iPad, and her students who teach her a lot of stuff about the digital lives. Her earlier paper on the virtual landscape in Zynga's popular game Castlevilla has published in the Sarai Reader. Thank you.
Good morning. It's always very difficult to talk about a subject like the virtual world because it's so popular that everyone thinks they know something about it. So also the other problem is that it's a different world, right, from the world of academics. As David was also telling, the virtual world is regarded as frivolous, something that you can't engage with, something like a game. Oh, it's just a game, it's just something time pass and stuff like that. But coming from the other side of the divide into academics and knowing both worlds, an engagement with the virtual world has become significant, if not necessary. Not everyone has to do it, but I think as an aspect of human endeavors, the virtual world is very, very significant for a lot of people. And if you're studying people, we also need to study what they're doing. And so if not, a lot of people who have been studying this virtual world are basically in communications and journalism. In fact, if you go to our sister institution, Manipal Institute of Communication, you'll find about 5 or 6 dissertations on how communication networks work in the virtual world. And you know, the whole, somebody was raising the question, the idea of social media. When we search for philosophical papers, the last few books that were written were in 1990s when it was just a new thing. And since then, as David has said, it's come a long way. And though people tend to write about it, they tend to use the same old theories, whether it's Marxist theories, or they tend to consider the internet as one more aspect of human endeavors, whether it's political economy or in terms of, you know, the psychological effect of gaming and addiction. So these are some of the things that they explore. But I think what's necessary is a kind of a, since we're going on saying digital humanities and digital this and digital objects and digital that, I think it's important for us to step back and as philosophers or philosophers of science, step back and see what's happening. What are these things that are coming into being? Are we manifesting them through new vocabularies, or are they actually really out there? Are they just like mathematical objects or virtual objects, or are we talking about real ontological realities as we face them? So there are some broad-based themes that I would like to talk about. Here's a brief outline. I'll try to move in. The last part is kind of an add-on, so I'll talk to you about the second life, but in case it needs to be cut off, we can bring it up in the discussion later. First, I'm going to, the first thing that I'm going to do is virtual reality, in short, known by us as VR. We keep referring to it as VR, so I'm a lapse into VR. So when I say VR, it means virtual reality. Some kind of new changes are taking place, and some are just extensions of the old kinds of changes. I have a project of bringing philosophical ideas or concepts from Indian philosophy to bear on contemporary issues. I've been with Sundar's work on translation of concepts and all. I use translation and looking at conceptualization, like wording Indian philosophy in English and see what happens to it, or wording English in Sanskrit and seeing what happens to it. So that kind of methods in conceptual thinking have led to interesting ideas, and so I'm going to try a bit of that today, just to balance off the east-west thing. And then after that, after this interesting prelude on my idea of the real, I'm going to talk about the idea of the cyberspace, and partially based on this text which I've distributed, the 2 chapters. The book itself is very interesting. It's available on Questia. I'm sure there are copies. And then I'm going to look at the concept of the cyberspace as virtual space. What is virtual space? What is cyberspace? And basically, I'm going to try and look at the virtual as optical. You know, I'm also interested in the idea of the senses, and I feel the correct word is not virtual, but it's actually optical technology. It's not virtual technology, it's optical technology. Virtual is something that we are adding to it. So I'm looking at the idea of the virtual as the optical, Kevin Robbins and Krang et al. Actually also write a book on virtual geographies, and they tend to look at it as an extension of the old camera obscura and, you know, those machines we had. I think it was called phantoscopes or phantascopes. Correct me if I'm wrong. They were like, you wear them and you can see the world, and those kind of visual optical illusion things. And the last, we're going to look at the idea of the knowledge in the virtual, and these are two main themes, right? What does virtual world and knowledge do? Because the claim is that virtual world opens up the space of knowledge. I know yesterday somebody was talking about it. And what does it do to knowledge? If I could record an Assamese folk song and then put it on the net. In fact, if you have been watching television sometime in the hotel, there's an ad for Digital India. You know, the current government thinks it can digitize India or Digital India. And the ad actually shows a girl sitting on a boat who records a folk song and then sends it over online to somebody else, and then somebody adds something to it, keeps adding, and at the end you have this super cool rock number with, you know, English and the folk song and lyrics by a ghazal poet or whatever. So this kind of fusion of knowledge. So what is that object of many people producing a product instead of one? Is it like co-authoring a paper where you all sit together and produce one object? Or you're just adding? What happens to Wikipedia when people edit it and add it, right? So this is kind of assemblages of knowledge. So we are looking at the idea of knowledge. Finally, we're looking at the individual. What is I'm not talking about the subject here. I think it's sort of old-fashioned to talk about subjects here. We are talking about subjectivities, because the person who is on virtual world is also a real person, right? He's a subject. He is also being construed by the culture, socio-cultural milieu around him. But we want to talk about it as subjectivities, the process of creating the subject, a kind of a new orientation, if you want to call it that. So we're looking at these two main themes, knowledge and subjectivities, and then I'll maybe flag off some interesting points that this person raised. The reason I picked these two chapters is because they summarize a lot of other books and other references, and they kind of are not going in either the very cyber world is the next thing that's happening to us, or they're not going like, no, cyber world is nothing, we don't have to deal with it. They're kind of balancing it out. So the readings are really interesting. If you haven't read them, I'd request you to kindly go through them, because it'll give you an idea of the world you live in, which is fast changing into this virtually wired world. The simplest questions I want to ask here are just this. It's no longer about where is this, the questions of where we are and who we are become unimportant in the subjective world, because those questions are not the kinds of questions you would ask about the virtual world. What is the problematic is, where are we? You know, where are we located in terms of, when we are located between a body and a prosthetic vision equipment, whether it's a screen or a mouse or one of those glovey things that you wear on and play with that golf cart. Where is our spatiality? Where are we extended? I mean, are we extended in our body, in our thing? Where are we? So that's one question. And who are we? Because we are constituting ourselves continuously. We seem to have a transcendent identity where we are split into two people. One is the viewer who's watching, and the other is the user who's actually the interface that's, you know, you're looking at the mouse as an interface, but the body itself becomes an interface. So you're using your body to get into virtual space. So there's a kind of a split self there. The body self, which is being used instrumentally, plus the idea of instrumental reason. So these are some of the questions I'm going to throw up in this. There are no answers, and I certainly don't claim to have the answers, but these are some questions we can start to think and discuss about. The other point, the last point that I want to go is, how does the cyberspace go beyond the idea of the territorial or the local? in the form of a political, cultural, and geographical constraint. It's considered that knowledge or our production of self is actually constrained, the subjectivity is constrained by cultural milieu, by gender, by who you are, which community you belong, which language you can access, etc. And the cyber world tends to say that we are apolitical, acultural, and ageographical in some sense. So does being a netzian, the citizen of the net, imply that you're also not a citizen? You're no longer in a polis, you're no longer in, so being net, is a netzian a different person? Are we schizoid? We are netzians and then we are citizens? What are we? So that's something that is also interesting that I'll come to. So let's take a deep dive into Indian philosophy. This is a quote I thought, which kind of sums up what academics think of cyber technologies. I thought I'll put that up there. So it may reflect a lot of what you people also think, like sell books, earn a good living, corporate lecture secure, the shelf life is equal to that of a Big Mac. I suppose he means the McDonald's burger, but I don't know. I don't think he means the computer, okay? He means the big burger. So culturally he means, just gets, I mean, there's a political statement about McDonald's burger also here. Okay, let's look at the idea of the real. I'm referring back to a very old paper on Indian philosophy, which is written by Brooks, somebody called Richard Brooks, in 1969, where he analyzes a very interesting verse. He's talking about the Advaita school of thought in India, where the founder or the main proponent of that, who's called Shankara, who's very, very popular and everyone knows him kind of in India, and a kind of a hegemonic school which kind of hides the other schools. But it's very interesting because it's probably one of the philosophies along with the Buddhist philosophies that can actually grasp the virtual in a very philosophical way. And the reason they can do that is funny, we'll come to that. What happens there is, I guess Shankara is saying goodbye to everyone. He's supposed to walk off into the Himalayas into enlightenment. He kind of goes away into the ice mountains. Then all his disciples like, give us this last words, you know, any last comments, any last comments. And obviously there must have been some guy poking a mic at him. And he was like, what last comment can I give? I just want to say this. I just want to say, this is the crux of my philosophy. And he kind of gives this pithy verse. I'm not going to quote the verse. It won't make any sense to you. But this is what he says, that the only thing that is real in the world is the absolute. And the empirical world that we live in is false. He actually says false, mithya. And he says the individual self, the subject, is the same as this absolute self, which is Brahman. Okay? It's a very common theory. From everyone from Ken Wilber to Shiva Ria has been talking about this, right? And not anything else. What's interesting is the analysis of this. Let's keep this Brahman and individual self and all that aside. We're looking at when he says it is real and the world is false, what are they doing there? What are they talking about? What is real, what is false? So obviously if you go into the philosophy and look at what is real and what is false, you're going to get a rich vocabulary for real and what are real objects. It kind of adds to the realist and idealist debate, but also gives you an idea of what are real objects from the perspective of Advaita or from a philosophical perspective. Okay. The fundamental premises of this is that only Brahman, the absolute, is real, and the individual self that shares an identity, remember Sundar was talking about that, it shares an identity, it's identical to, it has identity relations. That means it is not a copy, it's the same. Both of these are really real. I'm going to use this word really real in order to say that that is the way Advaita talks about it. And everything else which excludes Brahman and the individual self, which are same, is unreal. So it's like, this is real. I'm just going to point to the real. This is the absolute. Everything else, it's all unreal. Dreams, unreal. Coffee machines, unreal. Cameras, unreal. My lecture, unreal. You, me, and all these differences, unreal. Okay? So they kind of do this. When you look at this, it's rather a difficult claim to understand, right? You're like, oh, I'll hit you one and then you'll know what's real. Okay, so but this difficult claim seems to be dismissive of all human enterprise, all that we are doing. And sometimes people become very when we say people have become, this is probably led to the reason why when people say you're philosophical, they mean you're uninvolved and so, you know, hard-hearted that, you know, people tend to do this in India. Sometimes when somebody is suffering, they'll say, oh, it's all Maya, it's all unreal. Because it's not hitting them, right? And it hits other people, it's always unreal. When it hits you, it's real. So, but coming to this verse point provides an entry point for Brooks in his paper to examine what is meant by the word real and how can we understand this notion of real. And how can this understanding of real help us to understand the virtual reality of the information technology universe? Okay. So, the idea of engaging with the realist and the idealist, you know, the digital objects of the virtual world tend to have a mystical entity as if they are something beyond, and that comes from a very, I'll talk about it a little later, that comes from a very deep-rooted history of transcendence. It starts off with Plato and then goes on to the camera obscura. So this whole disembodied vision light kind of thing is giving you an idea as if these, it bestows it some mystical power with cyber culture, wow, virtual world. And it actually psychologically tends to make us think that it's something mystical and something very extraordinary. And when we see it is not so. So we'll look at that, and we'll look at that from the point of view of Advaita, because Advaita is also making a claim, right? It's not, the empirical world is not what you think, and there's this mystical, absolutely really real thing. Okay, when you look at it very cursorily, that's what it looks like. But if you start to unpack what they are actually saying, you get some interesting idea. So the point to note that not only the external world around us is real, but also the world, when he says empirical world, I don't only mean the external world, I also mean the psychological world, the world of thoughts, emotions, imaginations. Your Sherlock Holmes, everything, all, except for the Brahman. So it's kind of, Brahman is a single unitary set, and everything that does not belong to that set is unreal. The idea of the real and the unreal has nothing to do about the existence of the entity, but more to do with the meaning of the real, which is like unchanging, eternal, independent, etc. So let's look at the conceptual meanings of real as Brooks analyzes this, and I've added my bit to it too. So look at it in 4 registers, right? The first 4 registers I'll talk about. So first, we've been talking about these things, so I'm just foregrounding it. The first is the real that is genuine. And I know as museum collectors, as art people, we look for the genuinity. What is the real Van Gogh painting versus the imitation? So there's this whole idea of real and imitation. So we have the idea that something is real, therefore provenance becomes important. You need to trace the real. You need to investigate, find, and then check your real signature versus a forged signature. So it's like, I don't want your digitally signed, I want your real signature on this. So that real versus a copy is, there's an original. It draws back to the idea that there's an original. Slightly deriving from this idea of the original, if nature becomes the original, then anything we do to nature becomes artificial. So what is real? Is that real leather? We're not saying it's fake leather, we are saying have we interfered with that and made it into an artificial leather? So it draws from the first definition, there's a distinction drawn between the natural and the artificial, which again functions as when we use the word real, we are always saying this is a real lecture or this is an artificial lecture. So the question is, if I'm on Second Life and I'm giving you the same lecture, is it a real lecture or is it an artificial lecture? You know, the questions start to arise now. Oh, by the way, the point of philosophers is not to answer questions, but to complicate them. Okay, I've been taught by the best, and they always say that. The important thing is to ask these questions and not to find the answer. So the more I talk, the more you're going to get confused and more complicated in your head, and it's good. It's a good state of philosophy to be. The third kind of real that is suggested by Brooks is that the idea of the real versus imaginary, right? Did I really see an elephant in the room, or did Macbeth really see the ghost, or was it an imaginary ghost? This is very interesting because this is a concept which is very embedded in the Indian philosophical traditions, because for Indian philosophy, perception is a central point of validation and of truth. So they have an entire epistemological system, if you want to call it, a system of knowledge that is based on perception, and perception not as seeing is believing, but perception as valid perception, for which they, from which they draw other theories of inference and other logics, right? So perceptive truths are very important, and once you mix up perception and validity together, you have an interesting combination of, if perception and validity are mixed, like truth value and validity, and verification is important for perception, then you also have a very rich theory of error. You have theories of error, which is called akyativada. That's like, if you are seeing something and it's not real, why are you seeing it as real? Right? As if it is real. If you're going in the desert and you're seeing this mirage, and then you're not able to make out whether the mirage is real or not, how will you find out it's real? A very interesting aside is that one of the philosophers says, you drink the water, it's real, can't drink it. So success, a pragmatic success, actually demonstrates reality for you. So it's very easy for us to judge whether the virtual world is real, because if you drink water in the virtual world, do you actually have an experience of drinking water in the real world? So you can easily say it's false, it's not true. But then we come to other things. We'll come later to the idea of affect in the body. So we'll look at that. So, the idea of error theories, error could also be because of some kind of mistake in the senses, and which is very interesting, because you can turn this error theory on its head and say the reason you can see things, the way to see things that are not actually there, is to get yourself a prosthetic which will cause those errors to happen. Let's say if you wanted to see the world upside down, you get yourself this focal lens, and which turns the world upside down, and wear it, and then you will see what is the world as it is not so. And we know from studies in embodied cognition and others that we can actually get used to an upside down world in quite a few days. I mean, the people, they did this right-left, a person was given this right-left interchange thing, and my eye and the hand are most important. By the way, if you're handless, you cannot work. Although voice-operated thing, I could show a demo, but all of you could see it during the interval. If you talk to Siri on the iPad, it doesn't always get you right. You have to get the accent and everything right. So, see. Yeah.
Soccer games on the radio, nothing optical, pure imagination.
Looks fantastic. Yeah, that's true. We have cricket, yeah.
Really say, I know there's this optical turn, but it's not only optical.
That's why I'm planning to call it a sensory turn, right? Yeah. So here is Siri. So if I just press my iPad, right? Hello, Siri. That's the auditory input. Right? How many of you have done this on the iPad? Talk to Siri. Optical technology. Oh, I put it on silent, yeah. That's oh. So sometimes you say Sanskrit words, it say, I didn't get that. It'll talk back to you. So when I'm really bored and I don't have anybody to talk to, I talk to the iPad. Yeah. I also talk to cats and plants, but that's another thing. When iPad talks back to me, supposedly. So the optical prosthetic here, we're looking at basically the game world and the virtual world. So I'll stick with the optic when I know that there are auditory technologies like that. But what happens is in that, it's here, right? In this, it's sort of apparently real, apparently experiential, right? So I've heard that, that people can actually touch the, so I think auditory and touch together actually make up for the visual, because I've heard people say that they can feel the vibrations of music. But unfortunately, my visually challenged person has not got access to that kind of imagination, because born blind. And so the only thing they can distinguish, but she can actually distinguish very good musical tones. So that's a very interesting idea. So maybe one day it'll become multisensory instead of just being optical. But let's take it for example. Now here is a screen controlled by us. It becomes an extension of the human perception, allows us to grasp a transcendent, an abstract and somewhat aphysical environment, right? In fact, one of the interesting things about the idea of cyberspace versus virtual space is good, because the word cyberspace actually captures the idea of the spatiality of the sensory without invoking only vision, right? So if you start calling it cyberspace, the word cyber derives from the Greek word kybernan. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it rightly, cybernan, and that means steering. So you're steering your way. So that's why people tend to forget that the virtual world is not like the cinema because of the presence of the palm, the mouse, the touch device. Because there is a touch device. You can have a direct touch device or a thing. There is a way in which you steer through this world. So the very act of steering gives you a feeling that you have control over it. I mean, if I turn here, right, I'm still an autonomous entity because I can steer in this world through my body. The same kind of steering, whereas when you're watching a movie, you have to watch the movie as the camera guy is giving it to you, right, as the director is giving it to you. If you want to suddenly look to the right of the hero and check something out, it'll be very difficult. But in the optical world, in special, I mean, there are bad versions of it, but in a very good 3D environment, as we call, which has become very important, you have this, I've worked on the 3D environments. Zynga games are mostly 2D environments, but the 3D environments, you can actually turn around. In earlier games, when you turn around, there'll be like a blank wall, there's no turning. But now in large virtual worlds like Second Life, you can actually go, you'll be walking towards a rocket and you forget and you can walk suddenly towards yourself. So it's kind of, there's also whether the idea of whether there's a tunnel, right? The tunnel vision of the thing has become now a panoramic vision, and especially with panoramic cameras and stuff. I know there was a film that was done that way, but I couldn't find the text or the name of the film. There's a film that was taken as a panorama, and so at any moment of time, the viewer could switch to the view where he wanted to be. He could switch the perspective. So he could watch the movie from front on or from the side on from thing. He could switch between views. It was just, I think, a 10-minute movie, but it was very, very interesting, that zoom in and zoom out kind of idea. The point of an optical extended space or a sensory extended space is that it's beyond the reach of one's body, particularly if it is a physically unattainable place that becomes reachable almost by everyone. So there's this person in a wheelchair who says, I'm so happy in the optical world because I can run. Now, I don't know what that experience of running is, but the whole idea so there are interesting papers on these kind of ideas where people, I can never know what it is to go on top of Mount Everest and look down. So somebody can show me a film about Mount Everest. Somebody can actually go there and look down and show me what's there in a camera. But I don't get the experience of me climbing. So if I can actually stimulate my avatar to climb and do all this stuff, then I feel, I think, a psychological effect where it feels as if I've climbed it and seen it. And this is being increasingly used in, virtual stimulation stimulators. Stimulators use the same technologies to actually give training to their pilots. They have a machine and then they have this virtual sky, and almost all aircraft training is now done through stimulators. So you don't have young pilots crashing or learning pilots crashing down that much nowadays, because you just do it in a stimulator. You can crash 100 times and still learn. One day you'll fly. In creating this fiber space, the empirical world is not copied but experienced as reduced to types. So that's one thing that the world does. It reduces it to types. While in case of scientific objects, this is something I thought of, and I thought I'll talk about it here. While in the case of scientific objects, as Sundar pointed out, planets are reduced to points and motion to lines, right? In the optical world, that happens. The experience or the images and the reality is reduced to a set of codes which are called algorithms. I'm hoping Sundar will talk a little about that. They're reduced to logical algorithms. What are these algorithms? They're more, I think the model of the genetic genotype, phenotype will be more useful to understand here, because it's reduced to a set of codes that codes for images, actions, movements, verbs. It's actually, that's why it's called a language, because it's just not an equation. It's not just a mathematical entity, but it's also a language. So the interesting thing about this is there is a retransfer of the code back into reality. Okay? Oh, I've gone forward. Okay. So when the retransfer of code into reality happens, what happens is code renders lines to pixels. The micro atoms of the digital world. So that's the thing. So even sound gets reduced to pixels. So we had what is called the 32-bit rate, great 32-bit rate experiment. So a guy loaded some 5 or 6 pixelated sounds. You know, he copied the song, converted back, and put it back into the thing, and asked people to listen to the, how small should you make it to catch the difference. Now it's a very interesting thing, because people think it's a new technology, and people think that it is coming from physics, but as from a woman's world, the first pixelation is done in cross-stitching. If you've learnt of cross-stitching, you know cross-stitching, you have a net and you use thread to make pictures. The earliest pixelated images or broken up images which make it are actually cross-stitching. I want to acknowledge this in public, because everyone keeps talking about how intelligent people were to reduce make colors and pictures into small and micro pointillism and all. Even all before that, we were cross-stitching. It's one of the earliest ways of decorating, where you use each square to actually draw these pictures. So it's a knowledge that is lost and not acknowledged, so I thought I'll just throw that in here. So the idea of pixelation, so each code, you code it, okay, and then you translate the code back into an experience. The disembodiment that occurs in virtual reality is called immersion, okay. It's strange that these things are, most of the material available on these virtual reality is found in gaming design and communication textbooks, or on blogs written by gamers. We don't actually have there are some books written like cyberculture, and there are lots of books, but we don't have the lingo, as they call it. It's not even a language anymore, it becomes a lingo. So the language of the designers when they talk about it. So Adams is a very important person who does a lot of this designing. He wrote this book called The Game Design. Yeah. So narrative, so there are 3 types of immersions. You can see this, it's very well done. Tactical immersion, when performing tactile operations that involve skill, players feel immersed in the zone, right? Then you have strategic immersion, almost cerebral, mental challenge. These kind of immersions are possible even when you're doing, say, knitting, or you're doing, let's say, solving mental puzzles. Narrative immersion, when you're lost in a book. So the way you're lost in a book and the way you're lost in a game is not different. I mean, psychologically speaking, they both are the same kinds of immersion. The interesting immersion that is actually an add-on in the virtual is called spatial immersion. It immerses when a player feels the stimulated word is perceptually convincing. That's probably what's happening, Ronald, when you're listening to the radio. You're spatially immersed in the football field. Your mind extends the space and you can actually see those people. But for a person who's never seen football before, he can't feel that. But in a virtual reality, optical reality, a person who's never been there, like first time I visited Skylands on Second Life, and it was very interesting. Yeah, okay. So let's move on to the idea of the knowledge. The space of the cyberspace is seen as a sequestered space, lost to the empirical world, extraterritorial, not terrestrial, extraterritorial space, because geographically things don't make any sense anymore. You're not in America, Africa, or whatever. My neighbor, for instance, is in Australia. My neighbor on Castleville, there's a Greek girl, there's a Chinese girl, and there's also a guy from Australia, and we can blow kisses to each other on Castleville without my husband getting upset about it. If I did it here, then it'll be like very difficult things to talk about. But out of place, that is out of the local, and out of time, out of historical time, okay, when I say out of time, it means out of historical time, I could be playing medieval world for all you know, causes new types of universalization. Real time is very, very important for virtual. Time is money. A lot of these games rely on your real time, your investment of your duration. Duration is very important for the virtual, so they haven't done away with the atemporal categories. So this results in new types of universalism that, that remain to be studied. What are these new universals that are created? So we need to study what kind of universalisms. Is it language? Is it a kind of concepts? So they are created. Let's look at, to sum up what constitutes cyberware, it's not just you and the body. It's you, the virtualware, what I call the virtualware, the interface, which is also, it's no longer about interface, it's actually a virtualware. These technologies are so complex that you have to wear these gloves. Somebody was talking about it. Sorry, it's a screenshot of my friend doing this thing. So it's it's a video, but I've taken a screenshot. So she wears this and she's actually juggling balls. Okay, we can't see the ball, but that's what is happening. Let's come, I have another 5 minutes. In the last 5 minutes, I would like to go at the subjectivities and the knowledge business. The question we want to ask is, do new forms of knowing and knowledge provided by ICT expand and enhance human cognition, as we have seen? Perhaps not, because a system of knowledge in the cyber world is constituted by what we call a techno-human hive mind. This is a very important theory that was, there's this very famous digital person who has a magazine called The Wired World, and it's his idea that the hive mind is is a mind that is a collective mind of people. And when the hive mind, earlier knowledge was linear, as we've seen in the book. Earlier knowledge was linear, hierarchical, but here is a collective of everybody putting their information on the net, where that information is somehow better and fluid and dynamic and more mediated, because we can keep correcting the knowledge and adding. All academics scoff at Wikipedia, but the hive mind theory says Wikipedia will be the best because everyone has access, and the public knowledge is much more valid and real than the thing. The problem with the hive mind is that, in some sense, scholars argue that this knowledge of the cyberspace is valorized through its very circulation. The very fact that assumption that everyone who has access to knowledge can access the cyberspace and contribute to it is based on a presumption that this circulating of knowledge will produce better knowledge or better systems of knowledge, whatever the better means. But actually what is actually happening is the whole valorization of this knowledge becomes through its circulation. So you have students telling us it's on the internet, so it must be true. There was a time when media, it's on the newspaper, therefore it's true, or it's on television. Everyone can see it. If something was wrong with it, somebody would stand up and say, yeah, it's wrong. And that's the interesting thing. And the other point is that the knowledge of the cyber world claims to actually correct the knowledge of the embodied world. So if the hive mind can solve problems of global change, environment, rapes, of law and order problem and everything. So you just digitize India and corruption will disappear. So this whole idea that it can actually, being in the cyberspace will actually solve the problems of the embodied world is a kind of presumptions I think is deeply flawed in its thinking. So it's like Plato's world soul, or the storehouse of consciousness, Vijnanalaya, collectively holding all forms of knowledge. Oceanic knowledge is what they call it sometimes. So this form of new knowledge is an information deluge. It comes from the reading in the first chapter. If you read, it's a disordered knowledge. It's a knowledge in flux. It's a utopian view of collective knowledge, which has existed for a long time, where idealism. So the point is, it takes a neutral stand. It says, yeah, there are these problems in the real world. There are problems in the cyber world, but I think it's overall very good. So there's this utopian view. And the deterritorialization of knowledge that is no longer political or grounded in reality. And then the other thing is the communication fix. Okay, this is a presupposition that happens where they say all our problems in the real world are because we can't communicate properly. So they reduce all problems to a kind of not being in communication. So if you're only able to sit face to face with Obama and talk to him about world peace, he'll stop the nuclear war. You know, so the thing is, I cannot go to Obama and talk to him and tell him what a great thing peace is. So if I only solve the communication problem, and so I can Skype him or I can go and meet him in Second Life, I would solve the world's problem. So this whole idea of reducing problems to a communication fix is also a feature of the cyber knowledge. Coming down to the political, I'll finish up in 2 minutes. Coming down to the political, what happens in the spatiality of the political is that politics on the net, the kind of groups, web communities, contestations, are actually not contestations of people, but of interests. And interest-based politics is a very difficult thing to handle. So it actually pacifies your politics. You know, it allows you to say, I don't like the killing of whales in Japan, and you can click like on it, you can share it, you can sign that, but nothing will happen. So it's a kind of a pacifist, it pacifies by valorizing exchange or your commitment of interest, you're actually making sure that, you know, somebody actually quotes this, I can't remember who said it, for people, you can have interests and you can opinions on the net, but for revolutions you need people. So there are no people on the internet, there are only interests. So I'm interested in these things, I'm interested, I sign up for likes, I don't sign up for likes, I play Second Life, etc. So the idea of what is politics without people and what is a politics of interest is something, a question that can be further explored, particularly in people. So the idea of calling it social media, for instance, actually says that it has media interests. And if it's a world of interests, and interests are something that big corporations, multinational agencies latch on to. Because the moment something is interesting, or it's in your interest, then it is very easy for the corporations to actually latch on, and there's a whole world of political economy which is based on interest-based economy. And what happens because of the interest-based economy is very funny. Sony has got a music store in Second Life. So you can click on the store, shop. When you click on shop, it will send you the music that will be stored in your Second Life avatar files. Supposing data gets lost, let's say I pay $2 for an A.R. Rahman song. It's available, by the way. If you go there, you'll get A.R. Whatever is in Sony is in that. So you go, see that legacy, artist loan, the club, the loft, the apartment. So I can only go to the shop. I'm not premium, so I can't go to the other places. So I go to the shop, and then it says, so like an online download, you just go and you get it. But the music is not coming to me on my iPad. It is stored in my Second Life file. So that's why it's cheaper than the actual file. Okay? Doesn't matter for India. I guess in places where there's piracy is not present or we can't free downloads. I think it's an interesting thing. So you can go there. And by the way, these are people, real people, okay, who are having cyber world. Okay. So two small incidents, two small anecdotes. Glitch is a game of giant imagination, which is called a massive multiplayer MMORG, as it is called. So real-time playing, you can play with people all over the world. What is interesting about these worlds is that you are allowed to create your world. You're allowed to create the objects you interact with. There are a few basic shapes given to you. You can build houses, you can have that. If you look it up on the internet, you will find out that in Glitch, one avatar, that's the virtual self, had non-consensual sex with another avatar. And it blew the whole game, right? There was such a big thing. How much of freedom can the game person have? So using some tools given for them to play around with, they actually had non-consensual sex. They literally raped somebody on virtual world. So what does it mean to rape an avatar raping another? Is because it has affect and it doesn't have reality. Your body doesn't experience rape, but it has the affect of non-consensual sex. So what is that? And I haven't put any of those graphic images, but if you go and do image Second Life, you will get the porn sites. So there's a whole amount of cyber sex happening with really good bodies. It's actually soft porn, but it's actually in Second Life. And there are actually people who are doing that. In Second Life, what's happening is I'm talking. I can talk to the person whom I'm interacting with. If I click them, it says talk to this person. Then I talk and they say, open to conversation, yes, and both of us start chatting. It's actually a voice, it's a phone conversation, right, with our avatars doing. So if I shake hands, I can say, some games will say, accept friendship, yes. Then actually the avatar will walk up and shake hands with that other avatar. So things like that happen. So this is Second Life. Second Life claims it's not a game. Second Life is a Second Life, okay? Huh? Yeah, I'll just wrap up. So Anshe Chong is the main, and cultural effects. You know, there's so many posts on in Malayalam and Tamil. There's so many groups. Suddenly you find out somebody is a part of the Brahmin advancement group or something like that, and then you have to defriend them or do what. So all these kind of strange things that happen on the internet, they all post things in Malayalam, like there's a whole set of activist statements in Malayalam, which obviously they don't want me to access. So the same cultural, the person is cultural, he's embedded in the local, and then he's going to project himself as deterritorialized. I think it's something like as if the world is real, they behave that way. So that's the point.